Well, Focus Gaming News. Today we're speaking to Maarten Haijer, Secretary General of the European Gaming and Betting Association. Maarten, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Joe. Thank you for having me.
It's to begin. I know it's been a very unexpected and a very challenging year, and very difficult, I imagine, to sort of summarize the situation being faced by the EGBA's members at the moment. And obviously, very different contexts for different types of operators. But could you tell us a little bit about how from the EGBA's standpoint, you see the challenges being faced by members, both for land-based operators on one hand first, perhaps, and then online operators?
Yeah, so I think there are some short-term challenges, hopefully short-term with COVID, but some longer-term challenges as well, and this kind of culminates in this year. Our members are focusing on online, so my knowledge obviously is mostly focused on the online sector, less on the offline sector. Clearly, COVID is an issue for all gambling operators, whether online or offline. The premises need to be shut. For the offline sector, is a significant, development in your business, obviously, but also for the online sector, our members. Sports betting, as you know, is by far the biggest product, I guess, in Europe for sure, but I guess around the world. No sports betting, despite some ping pong games in the Ukraine and what have you. To be honest, there was hardly any sports to be bet on. So what we've seen for this period is really the business going down. Some of it has been replaced by online casino, but limited only. And now sports getting back up. I think, business are getting back up the rails again. So that's hopefully the short-term challenge. I think the bigger challenge that we have as an industry, and I think there it's regardless of whether it's online or offline, is that at least in Europe, people look not very positively on gambling. They never have, but it seems to be increasingly bad. And I think there, the industry as a whole, now I'm speaking again for online, but the online sector in particular as well, we really need to take notice of that. We need to take a step back, look what's happening, and see what we do wrong or what we could do better as well. I think that's a much longer term challenge, especially if we want to see where the industry is at in 3-4 years' time. I think we really need to start looking at our own behavior as well.
It's you mentioned that the reputation of gambling. Do you think that online gambling gets a harder rap than land-based for some reason in terms of the reputation, and why do you think that is?
I'm not sure it actually is. I think for most people, most outside of the industry, people, gambling is gambling. Might be with the exception of the kind of traditional lottery product where you buy once a year for the end of the year, a lottery for New Year or Christmas. Other than that, I think people see gambling as gambling. So I'm not sure whether online is viewed very differently than offline. But again, I represent online, and it's very clear that there are many, many challenges in jurisdictions that used to be much more friendly to the online gambling sector, like Spain, of course, UK, Denmark, Italy, where now the regulations become more stringent. And I think overall gambling is in a more difficult position. Online gambling certainly also is.
And you mentioned, obviously, of course, sports betting still accounting for, well, I think the largest vertical, the largest market for gambling. And would you say from the numbers that you've seen, this sort of fear or talk of a kind of a spike in online casino gambling as a result of lockdown being unfounded? For most operators, have they found that it's not replaced or being able to make up the loss from sports betting?
Yeah, that's true. I think initially there was this idea that people were staying at home, they would do more online gambling because you're bored, you do whatever you can do to keep yourself occupied. And a lot of people have done lots of stuff, including making puzzles to keep themselves occupied. So why not online casino as well? But the figures have shown actually that while sports betting has been has more or less disappeared over a period of I think 6 weeks, 8 weeks, let's say 2.5 months. Online casino for certain operators has increased indeed, but for most it hasn't. And overall, for sure, the figures have not, have come down for this period, online gambling figures. So yes, there has been some replacement, but it's been actually surprisingly little, to be honest. The amount of progression, or not progression, but transition from online betting to online casino, to be honest.
And how do you see the results of alternatives to live sports, things like eSports, virtual sports?
Yeah, I think there's obviously like everyone, we've all tasted a new life with COVID, lockdown, we all work from home. So new things have been, maybe existing things have been tried by more people. Maybe that's the right word of saying it. And maybe also more developments have taken place for, let's say, esports than before. However, I mean, I don't have the figures to back it up, but when I speak to people and my own kind of appreciation of it, that nothing really beats live sports. And live sports with an audience, because if you watch football games, they're not the same with as without an audience. So I think still the atmosphere of a live game, the build-up, the audience, is difficult to replace by something like esports. Again, I think trends will be there that esports will go up, but so far I think the proper live games are by far more desirable by the customers than esports.
Yeah. Well, you've mentioned changing atmosphere in regulation in Europe. One of the factors within that has been, of course, advertising. We've seen Spain obviously introducing tight restrictions on advertising, expected to come in later this year. Other countries considering making changes. I know that the EGBA attempted to head off this in some way, establishing its own kind of standards early in the year. Do you think that the standards proposed by the EGBA have been welcomed in general and have done something to assuage regulators' appetite for getting tougher on gambling promotion and publicity?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe just first to start with the advertising restrictions that are there, and then we go to the EGBA code of conduct. I think advertising is a particular issue because advertising is what makes the sector visible to a much wider audience. So a lot of jurisdictions, when there was no regulation, there was also much more limited advertising, so much more limited visibility, not just to the average person watching TV or being online, but especially also to the media and to politicians. So with regulation coming in place and advertising being regulated, much wider audiences now seeing around sports games, especially a lot of advertising. I think the almost discrepancy by the number of people playing or potentially playing online gambling and the massive exposure that it gives to a much wider audience, there seems to be a big disconnect there. And maybe people are fed up with seeing too much of products that, first of all, they're not interested in, and secondly, they don't have big positive associations with. So I think that's where probably a large part of the problems come from. Having said that, we're not aware of any academic study whatsoever that links the level of advertising with problem gambling. So it creates a lot of annoyance. And even when I watch a football game and you have before, during, and after a game, kind of very similar sports betting ads, you start to wonder why. So even people in the profession themselves can see why you could get fed up with it. Having said that, as I said, there's no study that we're aware of, at least, that says that there is a clear link between the level intensity of advertising and the and problem gambling. Nevertheless, it's there. It's a reality. We just have to look at the number of jurisdictions that you said. Politicians respond, and they respond by making it more restrictive. So we need to do something. I think that's as an industry, we need to do something not just for advertising, but much wider, but maybe we can discuss that later, but for advertising as well. That's why we developed the code of conduct. And it's very, it's wide in its scope, so it addresses both broadcast, so radio and TV, but also digital advertising. It does not address volume, not because we don't think volume is a topic in quite a few countries, but is, as I said, it's very local discussions. But our code focuses really on the content. So how do you make sure that advertising is not suggesting wrong things or enticing young people to play or promising things that are just not true, not financially rewarding, making it, a proper ad that doesn't overpromise and certainly doesn't entice either the young or people that are vulnerable. So what we've done, we developed the code. It's now applicable to our members, but we also had a study done by an organization that actually represents national advertising authorities. It's called EASA. And we had 15 of these national advertising authorities perform a gap analysis. So they took the EGBA code of conduct and compared it to the regulation and self-regulation in place in 15 European member states, 14 member states and the UK, and compared it. So the gap analysis. And that's been extremely helpful because now we can see where, let's say, our code is in some places more strict or less strict, but also where we can reach out to certain jurisdictions. And we're now going to follow up with these jurisdictions, and we actually have meetings planned with certain jurisdictions to see what parts of the code they would like to have implemented in their jurisdiction as well. So it's the beginning of a long discussion, but we're hopeful that it will influence also regulators or legislators more than regulators probably.
Excellent. It's and as you mentioned this, perhaps people who are not bettors or not interested in the sector feeling this sort of saturation of publicity. Do you think that's something that operators should bear in mind, maybe regardless of when restrictions are put in place? Are there any things operators should consider to avoid that feeling of saturation? That at the moment we're still seeing a lot of sponsorship deals being made between gambling companies and football teams, even in Spain, where we're expecting probably in the next few months restrictions on sponsorship to come in. Do you think that there's something operators should bear in mind to sort of avoid promoting that kind of response?
Yeah, but that's a very difficult one because I think we also need to make a distinction between sponsorship and TV ads and the different kinds of marketing that are out there. In Denmark, maybe you're aware, there was an attempt made a few months ago, maybe half a year ago, to get some kind of an agreement between the operators that are on the market to have an agreement to limit the level of advertising. And actually, that had been received with a quite negative response by the Danish competition authorities because they say it's anti-competitive. Operators that are a large part of the market already, when they say we're not going to advertise anymore, the industry doesn't advertise, it doesn't allow smaller operators to come on the market as well. So there's really major issues by having self-regulatory limitations to advertising when it goes beyond I, as an individual operator, do something. But yeah, then obviously the problem is how do you do that? But I agree. I think there needs to be at least awareness of the operators that this is a highly sensitive topic. And maybe also make, it's not just the amount of advertising that you do, but also maybe targeting would be wiser. You could look at certain targeting and also to make a more distinct advertising product. So not have the same advertising as the next one making ads as well. So I think I feel operators could do more, but as you know, one of the adagiums of people that do sponsorship and advertising, 50% of it works, but you don't know which 50% it is actually that works. So you go for the full Monty. But joking aside, I think, yeah, you're right. I think there needs to be more awareness. And maybe operators should not just think we need to advertise because the competitors advertise as well. Having said that, easy for me to say from my desk here at home what an operator should do. But the big thing is that we see what's happening if nothing is done. Then you get situations like Italy and Spain, and to a lesser extent, I think the UK, but I think at least the operators are doing something there.
It's well, turning to regulations in general. How do you see the evolution of the regulation of markets in Europe at the moment? There are quite a lot of developments. Germany's rather complicated framework for licensing online gambling from next year, and the UK now, which has always been maybe one of the markets that regulators in other countries have looked to follow, is its regulator facing criticism from politicians that the regulations need to be tougher, that it needs to do more. And they're calling for stricter restrictions on everything from advertising to game design. How do you see the evolution of regulations? Is it a risk for operators?
Yeah, I think it is. Clearly it is. And if we take a step back where we were maybe 10 years ago, we were still in the process of getting regulation in place, fighting certain, as operators, fighting even as EGBA, fighting certain regulations and legislators, picking our battles. And with more and more regulated markets coming into place, I think we now are in a regulated industry, bar a few member states in Europe. It's a regulated industry. We weren't, let's say, 10 years ago, because it was very unclear which rules were applicable, the European rules, Maltese rules, whether the rules in place in a certain country were genuinely complying with EU law. So there was a lot of gray areas. And I think the number of countries where there are gray areas are very limited. We have Germany, where it's very unclear still. The Scandinavian countries, Finland, I would say, Norway, I think Switzerland also to a certain extent, but the number is just dwindling. So we are a regulated industry, regulated market. And as an industry, we need to behave in a way that regulated industries do. And we need to have a place in society that gives us a sustainable position. And that's where I think our self-regulations and tools come into place. We need to show to the regulator, and more importantly, even to the legislator, to the politicians, that we're a serious industry, that we want to be a serious part of your regulation, your society, and we take responsibility for what we do. And I think that we're there at the discussion at the moment. If you see with the discussion in the UK, as you said, more regulatory pressure, but the BGC, so the British Gaming Council, the Betting and Gaming Council, they are stepping up their act really well. So they have more high standards as well, more stringent self-regulation. There, the discussion between what the industry needs to do and what regulation can do, I think, is really kind of at the forefront. And I think that will happen in a lot of other countries as well. It will not get less regulation, that's for sure. This channeling idea, namely that you need to have rules in place that allow people to play within the regulated environment, is a very good and strong argument. I think that's something that regulators understand. But we need to keep educating and pushing that argument, because there are pressures to have even more stringent rules, which in themselves are not bad, but we cannot, let them be so stringent or difficult that people start playing on websites that are regulated, not in the EU or nowhere else. So that's, let's say, where the difficulty lies. But I think for us as an industry, regulation will get only more tight, more stringent. It will not be less, and we need to adjust. And that's it, full stop. The duty of care for our customers will be something that's there in the UK, in Germany, in the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain as well. Whether we like it or not, that's the future, and that's the environment that we operate in going forward.
And do you think there's a problem that legislators are not aware of the extent of the risk of unlicensed of driving players to unlicensed operators? Do you think the lack of visibility of the unlicensed market compared with the visibility achieved through publicity for licensed operators means that sometimes legislators are not aware that it's there, and it's a possibility that players that could be channels to licensed operations go elsewhere?
I mean, it's a perfect question. I think it's it's absolutely true. Um, we make a distinction. We should make a distinction between regulators and legislators. I think regulators are very well educated. They know the market. They know, the ins and outs and how, let's say, um, the effect of regulation is on operators and on how their market functions. But regulators don't make the law. The legislator in general makes the law in most countries. And the legislator reacts to either what they see themselves or what public opinion is or other reasons to act. And I think, for instance, COVID, the costs of all the programs, taxes will need to be raised, and obviously there are some sectors that are less popular and others that are more popular. And I'm sure that we will get more pressure for tax raises in our sector as well too. So it's a quite easy sector to look upon for more tax revenue. And the lack of knowledge, I fully agree, the lack of knowledge also makes it easier for legislators to say, okay, this is a sector where we can get some more money. They advertise like crazy, they're undoubtedly very rich. It's a not very highly regulated industry. There's no reason why we cannot tax them higher. And if they don't get the business, our state lottery gets the business. So there are no, bluntly speaking, but from that perspective, there are no losers if you raise taxation for online gambling. And I think it's also up to us as an industry to educate that that's not the case. I think if you tax or regulate beyond capacity, people will go to websites that are not regulated. And I think that's, for the insiders, it's clear. For the outside world, that's not clear at all. And I think it's also up to us as a sector, probably also up to the regulator, to educate the politicians more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, is there anything you'd like to add before we finish, just on the EGBA's actions at the moment and things that you're looking to do as a body?
I think we have this code of conduct for advertising, and we would urge other operators to sign up to it. There is a monitoring involved in it as well, and so because there's not much use in having a code of conduct on a piece of paper, sending out a press release and say we have a code and we comply with it. So our members will be monitored against their compliance against the code of conduct. We've been speaking to a number of operators, and a number of times when we mentioned that there will be monitoring involved and therefore some costs, they've all, not all, but some of them have kind of disappeared from our radar screen. And I think it's a shame, but I think it also shows you a bit where the industry still is at, where something like a code of conduct, and irrespective of whether it's an EGBA code of conduct or someone else's code of conduct, that is supposed to show responsibility and is supposed to show that it's an industry that cares and has a high standards. As soon as it's costs involved, it seems to be costs and people shy away from it. And so that's very short-term thinking. And I think I would like to urge operators to look at the code and sign up to it. But I would also like to remind operators that if we want to be in existence in 4 years' time, we need to clean up our act, become more responsible and more sustainable. And the costs for monitoring of a code of conduct are infinitely more limited than the cost of more restrictive regulation. So it's all on our interests to act now in a responsible way to avoid even more stringent regulation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Maarten. Thank you for your time, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We look forward to seeing more initiatives from the EGBA and to speaking again in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maarten. Bye.